Hey, so my name is Aurora Salazar, and I am taking Mexican-American literature at Lone Star College. If you could just state your name.
Josh Inocencio.
Alrighty. So, why did you decide to write playwrights?
Well, the easy answer is that I've been doing theater and writing stories ever since I was a little kid, and from things like making plays in my living room to actually doing it in school. And so when I got into grad school, that's actually when I first started doing playwriting. And I had mostly studied theater as a director and a scholar and an actor up to that point. And then in grad school I had a moment where I was at times dissatisfied with the kinds of stories that I was seeing, or more that there were a lack of certain stories, Latino stories, queer stories, things like that.
Okay.
So I wanted to give a voice to some of those narratives, and that's why I started writing. And so I wrote my first play, Purple Eyes, in 2014 and put it up in 2015. And I've written 2 full-length plays since then and some short plays in that time as well.
Okay, so for your first play, Purple Eyes, why did you come up with that name? Or how?
So with Purple Eyes, I decided to do a solo show that looked at father-son dynamic with me and my dad. And I was... The first scene for Purple Eyes emerged from a class assignment in grad school where I had to write a comic scene that combined ethnicity and... a scene that combined ethnicity and comedy. And I wrote about... my dad when he did detective work in the 1980s.
Okay. And
he had to go undercover at XXX video stores and work glory holes. He had to dress in drag and work undercover at gay clubs, one of which is Numbers in Montrose, which is still around. And I was really interested in that because that's not the kind of typical work you think of when it comes to police officers, but my dad really liked doing it. Did you pause it, or is it still going?
I could cut out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I could edit it.
And my dad really liked doing the work, not because he was so not because he was homophobic or anything, but he's always been very much in touch with his feminine side, and so he's really comfortable dressing in drag and kind of accessing that part of himself. And so I performed a scene the first time he had to do the job where he was working one of the glory holes at a XXX video store, because it was really, it was humorous for me to imagine him in that scenario. That was the first scene I wrote, performed it for a class, and then it turned into a play from there. And so Purple Eyes comes from the fact he used to wear these purple sunglasses, and he was nicknamed Purple Eyes because everyone hated his sunglasses because they were so flashy. This was back in the mid-90s. And but I always really liked it because he never really cared about what people thought of him and what he wore and stuff, even if it was considered feminine. But so I called the play Purple Eyes because I wanted to engage with my ancestral history, but I wanted to do it through a queer lens. Okay. And so Purple Eyes become this way for me to look back on history, to understand my present sexual identity.
Okay. And what are you working on now?
So I'm wrapping up a trilogy project. Purple Eyes is the first play in a trilogy called Splintered in 3. And the whole trilogy looks at collisions between ethnicity and sexuality in my 3 ethnic backgrounds.
Okay.
So the second play deals with a great uncle I had who immigrated from Austria. And his name was Manfred, and he moved here to the U.S. and had this really decadent life that he lived that ultimately ended in tragedy. He died in his mid-50s from complications with drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And that one is called The Little Edelweiss, or An Immigrant's Fairy Tale. And so my dad, by the way, is half Mexican and half Austrian. So this is still his side of the family. And so the last play is called Chocolate Gravy and White Jesus, and it looks at my mother's side of the family, which is, they're all from eastern Kentucky. And so I sort of look at the haunts of being raised Pentecostal and considering Kentucky as this second home deep in Appalachia. I look at that history in particular. And so stitched together, the plays look at really one family cover over 100 years. It starts in the 1910s and goes until now. So it looks at an entire family's journey across like land and soul from different places. And they all look at historically forgotten groups, I guess. So Purple Eyes traces my family's journey from Michoacan, Mexico to Houston. We don't have a ton of history on like Austrian immigrants, so Little Edelweiss gets at that. And then, Eastern Kentucky and all of Appalachia is a pretty neglected place in terms of like our cultural consciousness. And so that last play, I write a lot in like dialect and trying to like capture the cadences of that region and stuff like that. So Purple Eyes is probably the most historically accurate of them in that all the events are true or can be vouched for. The other two plays, they're not solo plays. They have multiple actors, and they're much more, they're more me imagining scenarios that like could have possibly happened. Okay. So they draw from history, but also they draw a lot more from fiction. Okay,
sounds great. And do you consider yourself an activist? If so, how do you show that? Do you show that in your work, or, there's protesters, or you don't consider yourself an activist?
I don't consider myself an activist. That's I'm happy with the work that activists do, but that's not me. Like, I'm just a writer. I don't consider my work activist. I don't even necessarily consider it political, because I don't have a particular political message that I'm trying to get across. I'm trying to tell stories in the most complex way that I know how, and trying to capture nuances of people that live in these regions and come from these backgrounds. But for me, and a lot of people would disagree with me on this, but for me personally, I would have a hard time mixing activism with my writing. I can't do both.
Right. And so you've never written a poem?
Yes, actually, that's how I started writing, was through poetry. And it's when I was an undergrad, and I started writing with poems, and there was an undergraduate press that published a few of them, and that's really how I got started with writing. And then later on, I went more into essays, and then finally plays.
What would be your favorite poem
that I've written?
Or if anybody else has written, just your favorite, like in general.
Oh, that's hard to pick just one. I'll have to give you poets that I like. I like Dylan Thomas a lot. I like Frank O'Hara. I love Stevie Smith. So there's a few.
Well, that was amazing. I really want to see one of your plays, and I hope I do get the chance to. Well, that is all the questions that I have for you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
And it was great talking to you. And that will be it.